earlier in the show, we talked about the possibility of running Tor nodes, and that was kind of mentioned, and it made me think of this other project we're going to be talking with the principals of a little bit later in the month, Open Garden, right? This is a mesh network. So right now, they don't have any monetization methods built in. And if you remember way back, and I think it was episode 3 or episode 4 of Let's Talk Bitcoin, I talked with Joe Cascio, who in our conversation mentioned that you could use automated Bitcoin payments, microtransactions of Bitcoin payments, to essentially pay for your internet service based on use rather than based on a flat fee. And so the way that he envisioned this was you'd have, a mesh network set up where there are people who run nodes, run routers essentially that provide internet connectivity to anybody within the transmission range of the thing, rather than having to get a login and have an account. Instead, it would just be this protocol that says, okay, well, you want to use the internet, so here's your internet access in exchange for this, either on a per minute or per hour or per, bits of data, whatever rate that it was set up for on that local server. And it would be as simple as agreeing to the contract, and then as long as you're using the network based on whatever those metrics are, it would pay in. Now, one of the things that's been brought up about this is also another thing that's been talked about for Tor nodes, because Tor nodes are another one of those things where people provide it as a service, but because of the anonymity and because of that whole type of relationship, there's no way to monetize it. So the people who run nodes for Tor, which is a way that you can anonymously access parts of the internet and also anonymously access specific parts of the internet that are only available on that network. Sometimes it's called the dark net. Basically, it's hard to monetize that. This is not a solution to that problem, but it's a solution to a small part of it. The problem is that because Bitcoin has transaction times, there's no instant transaction. So if I want to use the internet and I'm trying to use one of these mesh network things in the scenario I've described, I have to wait like 5 minutes or 10 minutes for a confirmation or something like that. But what I was thinking is, what if you took it the other way? What if you extend the trust first, and then you say, okay, make this transaction now, but then as soon as the transaction has been made, whether or not it's confirmed, you just give access. And then, 5 minutes later, 10 minutes later, when the transaction, confirms, then you say, okay, good, you can keep having access based on this relationship that we've now developed. But even if the transaction comes back and it's declined and says, no, that didn't actually happen or it was fake or whatever, then you just cut off access at that point and there's no real loss to you. But you've solved this usability problem that exists right now where you can't do these things in other senses. Now, this wouldn't work with a cup of coffee, but for something like running a Tor node or running a Wi-Fi node where currently there's no way to monetize it, this actually seems like it could be a way to trust but verify, in the words of Reagan. Am I missing something obvious here?
I just love that you just quoted Reagan. I mean, that was kind of out of the blue.
I was thinking about that too.
But no, I think you're absolutely right. The opportunities for monetization are rather interesting. And it's very different if you're looking at a predominantly anonymous and designed for anonymity and deniability and privacy network like Tor, versus an open mesh network which is geographically focused. Like if I'm sharing my Wi-Fi, there's no question about who I am and where I am, because you have to be within 300 feet of my location to use it. So, so from that perspective, there's opportunities to do other interesting things when you don't care about anonymity. And that is, you can build reputation systems. So you can extend me a megabyte of data transfer and then have me pay it later. And if I'm being an ass and I don't pay for it, you'll know. So will the rest of the network. Or rather, if I'm good and I pay for it, you'll know. And so will the rest of the network. And so as a result, I can gradually build trust and reputation just by paying my bandwidth bills that are extended to me. And as long as I keep paying those, I build more and more trust, which can extend me more and more bandwidth. So there's some really nice mechanisms there that can also use reputation and previous payment history to build a lot of momentum behind this.
It's not even really about anonymity, since your name could be a Bitcoin address. It doesn't really matter what you're attaching the reputation to. It only matters that whatever it is has reputation.
Well, yes, but what you're doing is associating previous sessions to future sessions, because you need to repeat that for your trust account for your next session. And what that does is it taints each of your bandwidth sessions with the identity of the previous one. Even if that is a pseudonymous identity, you couldn't do that on Tor. It would break the entire model. It would mean that everything could be traced back to the first time you paid, because your reputation would be like a cookie that taints every transaction and tracks you forward.
Well, it just sounds like in some situations you don't want reputation. It sounds like in some situations like the Tor one where anonymity is in fact the goal, their reputation is anathema to that.
So for those, you would really do something like what you discussed, more charging on the honor basis, with the understanding that if you extend bandwidth that's not paid for, it's not a huge loss as long as you don't do it too often.
I'm trying to think of ways that somebody could game that system potentially. And one of the ways that I thought of was jumping on until they get kicked off and then signing on as a different identity while they're waiting to get verified and so forth. And I don't know how that could be prevented. I also don't know if there's anything malicious they could potentially do in that time that they're on. Or perhaps, they only need 10 minutes to do whatever they're going to do, whatever nefarious thing that they're going to do. They only need 10 minutes of access to whatever network it is to do it. Maybe those could be some concerns.
Compare it to the current state of a network like Tor, where essentially that's all that's happening. So essentially you never know. There is no cutoff. Everyone's anonymous. Everyone's using the bandwidth for free. What is today the norm becomes an edge case if you have a level of monetization. And I wouldn't worry about it. If you can take the norm and the most abusive behavior and turn it into an edge case, you're good, because the rest of the monetization opportunity you've opened up creates all kinds of incentives for creating more Tor nodes, which basically solves the problem.
Yeah, that's a great point.
And further to that point, I would actually say that you could turn it around and say, well, actually, if someone just has to do 10 minutes worth of stuff on, whether it be a Wi-Fi network or not, it seems like so long as, Andreas, as you said, that becomes an edge case and most users are participating, because there's no real disadvantage to not participating. If you're talking about a couple of cents per minute or however you wanted to do it, by making it really granular, you can make it very inexpensive and quite reasonable, actually. And again, because you're taking models that have no monetization in them at all and adding a way for it to be easy and to opt into that monetization and providing some sort of stick. I mean, because ultimately right now, with that free access, you don't get kicked off. But with this, you'd get kicked off if after the 5 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever of the grace period where the transaction is expected to go through. Then if it doesn't go through, then you just kick them off at the end of that. It seems like, yeah. So I'm repeating what you said, Andreas. I think I agree.
Perhaps there's some advertising built in there too during that grace period or whatever. So at least if the person doesn't pay, then they've been exposed to whatever ad has been shown to them or whatever.
I think, yeah, like a custom landing page could work. I think that you can go too far in that direction. When we were at Bitcoin 2013, I was on Marriott's Wi-Fi, Hilton's Wi-Fi, and those were fairly onerous systems for the complimentary quote-unquote access. And even then,
it was provided by Mt. Gox.
Well, there you go. I didn't know that.
I'm sorry. That was a mean joke. I just should clarify that. So I stayed at the Marriott during Bitcoin 2013, and there was a paper at the front desk that said, complimentary internet provided by Mt. Gox. And my partner and I looked at each other and said, okay, so it's going to be down a lot over the weekend, I guess. But no, they did provide complimentary internet, and that was very nice. I appreciate that.
Yes.
I like your idea about advertising, and you could make some great incentives like that. So if you use it for 10 minutes and you don't pay, you get Justin Bieber ads injected into your stream, at which point you go, I'll pay, make it stop.
Oh God, stop. Want to set up an online store that accepts Bitcoins? Go to openbitcoinstore.com and you can have a store up and running before the end of this message. Just enter your email address and the store name, and in less than 30 seconds, you'll have a secure WordPress e-commerce site up and running that accepts Bitcoins and pays you in cash within 24 hours. And best of all, it's completely free. Go to openbitcoinstore.com today and open for business now.
Let's Talk Bitcoin is heard each week by thousands of people who are participating in the new digital economy. Our listener base of Bitcoin owners, miners, investors, technologists, and merchants is growing fast. We offer a limited number of short advertising slots in each show to keep our listeners engaged and to provide maximum impact for our sponsors. If you'd like to talk to us about Let's Talk Bitcoin, send us an email at sponsors@letstalkbitcoin.com. So there's a new player in town that's talking about mining equipment that performs at a very high level. This is, again, continuing this thread of mining innovation that we've seen over the last 6 months really start to kick in, and lots of new ASIC manufacturers coming out. So there's a new one called Cryonics, spelled Cryoniks, that has a line coming out called the Bit line, I believe, and their first one is the Frost Bit. We're not actually recommending that you buy these or look at them seriously. There's actually...
But we do have a bridge to sell you if you are thinking about purchasing one of those.
Yeah. I mean, this is, we talk about shining examples and horrible warnings periodically on this show, and this is one that is still up in the air, but it really has all the makings to be a horrible warning. They've got hardware that seems to defy physics, that, doesn't actually exist yet, but they have nice mock-ups on it, great looking boxes with fans in it. It's fairly expensive. They're offering free shipping. Of course, the product doesn't exist yet, and so that's one of those hallmarks. More than anything else, it looks like the company that's behind it actually 2 years ago launched a Kickstarter. Not a similar product. It was also a hardware product. It was a USB device that was secured in a mechanical lock. And so, it's kind of this cool looking thing, kind of looks like a Da Vinci Code type thing, and walked away with $200,000. So there's a real temptation in this community right now to look at these things, to look at new products coming out and say, wow, that's really great, I'd like to invest in that. But there needs to be some skepticism applied. So we're putting on our skeptical hats here. We're going to take a little bit of a look at it. Stephanie, you want to talk about this?
Yeah, I try to keep my skeptical hat firmly attached to my head at all times, and this one is no different. There's actually an expose on Reddit by a person named Hack8or. He or she goes through and debunks point by point some of the things that were in the Kickstarter for this Frostbit thing. One of them is that it claims to use liquid nitrogen to cool the chips that they use, but to keep nitrogen liquid, and that's at, minus 80 degrees Celsius approximately, that requires a really fancy compressor and a lot of power, which this does not appear to have in this box with fans in it. So that was a pretty eyebrow-raising point, I would say. There's also a couple of other things that are pretty shady about this. They say on the FAQ for this Kickstarter that they'll be selling upgrades that will enable you to use it to mine Litecoin, process video, and do other things with it. But ASIC circuits are application-specific integrated circuits, right? They're designed for something incredibly specific, and the script algorithm, which is what Litecoin is mined on, is very different than the SHA-256 algorithm, which is what Bitcoin is mined on. So really, it seems like you would need completely different chips to do those different applications. ASICs are not really designed to be fungible like that. So this looks very sketchy. It seems like they're just kind of telling people what they would like to hear, and if it sounds too good to be true, then it probably is.
Bitcoin is the ultimate non-reversible transaction, and so caveat emptor, buyer beware, is a prime principle when transacting in Bitcoins. I have been inspired by this to release my new product called the Perpetua Miner. And what it does is it takes the heat output of your mining rig, and using a Stirling engine, it uses it to power the rig itself. And as a result, cuts your electricity costs by 100%, and you only need power to start it, and then you can unplug it, and it will then run on its own heat. So this is Perpetua Miner coming soon, and I'll be selling those, of course, on pre-order for Bitcoin without refunds.
How much are you charging for those, Andreas?
I don't know. It depends how greedy I'm feeling that day. Maybe a couple hundred Bitcoin to start with. Yeah. I'm going to get a really good designer to make a very fancy box with blue lights, because blue is in. And red
blue is fast. Blue means fast. Let's keep that in mind.
And cold, chilly.
Yes.
Yeah, yes. Absolutely. So, yeah, it's going to come in a fantastic box that's being designed by one of the designers of the Maserati. And it's streamlined so it can mine fast. It's very aerodynamic. And once you get it and realize it doesn't work, when you throw it out your window, it will go very far.
We should mention this is a developing story, and it looks like btcbible.com has a story up about it now, and they're in communication with the principals at the company trying to figure out if this is real or not. So there will be an update in a future episode talking about this. But it's important to recognize that even if this is real, there are so many claims being made, and so many of these things, even in the case of Butterfly Labs, even if you're assuming that they're not a bad actor and that they really did have good intentions with all the ways that they've gone about doing things and releasing their ASIC models, you can still just see that assumptions that are made at the beginning of the manufacturing process, a lot of times by the time you get to the end, are just wrong. And when you've sold units and made promises based on those initial assumptions, it's just a bad situation in general where even if you do deliver the product, you still have failed as far as your customers are concerned, because they didn't get what they expected because it changed.
BTC Bible has been in touch with the CEO of Cryonics and has requested a tester unit. They say they are going to donate any proceeds from the testing to Sean's Outpost, which is a Bitcoin-based homeless advocacy charity, which I think is great. I like to see mining test proceeds going to Bitcoin charities. So I'm curious to see if they ever receive it and how it turns out.
As Saint Satoshi said, trust but verify.